Okay, shall we begin by introducing ourselves with Sandy?
Sure, I'm Sandy Bodmer Turner, and I'm one of the general community reps on the task force.
And I'm Sue Philbrick, I'm on the planning board.
Richard Smith, I'm from the Soil Commission.
Gar Morse from the DIP Committee.
I'm Sarah Mellish representing the ZBA, but I'm also on Finance Committee and Affordable Housing Trust.
Denny Hall, I'm a citizen at large, I guess.
I'm Ann Harrison, I'm on the Select Board,
Michael Pratt, representing Finance Committee.
and Chris Olney.
Who is representing the plan?
Yeah, I'm here on an Ottawa, Canada. I'm glad to be the planning board and the Affordable Housing Trust.
Betsy asked me to make a few opening remarks about what this committee is and what our schedule is and what we are doing and what we are not doing. We are not building anything. We are not trying to figure out how to get out of the charge that the state has put us on. We are trying to put together zoning regulations that meet the requirements of what we are going to call the MBTA zoning laws. That's because I can't remember 48.3A consistently. And our goal right now is to have something we can put before the voters at the 2004 annual meeting in April. We don't need to have this regulation passed until December of 2004, but having two chances, at least two chances to get it done seems important. So we are on a very tight schedule. And we have technical support from Betsy Ware, who is the interim town planner, and she's been working on this for months. She put together the application that we put in December, which got us moving.
Did the state approve that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
The other, among the things we are not doing is looking around to see what other cities and towns are trying not to do this. That's Betsy's job. Betsy and her staff will report to us what's going on in other communities. And now I think we just need to get working together. We have our summer homework, our summer reading here, which is Betsy has prepared for us.
Part of your summer reading, which is a series of articles. It also includes the law. It includes a number of different documents. There is a schedule in there that is somewhat outdated. So part of my goal on having this meeting is to try to figure out, you know, when we can meet during the summer. Is summer out for most people? What's the best way to communicate, things like that. I will say, so as your staff person, if there's a request made by the board, then I will work to try to comply with what you need. We have applied for several grants. There's a very specific protocol that the state wants us to use, which is a combination of GIS and Excel, and I am not familiar with it, so we will likely be hiring a consultant to help us out on that end. We've applied,
That will also be available on the town website, or a link to that will be
Yes,
available on the town
yes.
website.
yeah. So a number of people on the planning board, and I will not speak for the planning board, but there is a master plan and there's also a housing production plan. Both of those documents are online, and both of those documents advocate for looking at more diversified housing to address the demographics of the community. And So I think it's an opportunity to take a look at whether we want to try to reach some of the goals of the master plan or the housing production plan in terms of addressing housing in Manchester. So obviously, a lot of policy decisions have to be made. It's going to be an interesting time period. There are a number of issues relating to land area that are going to have to be addressed at some point. So in any case, I will be your staff. You will also notice in the packet that I gave you that I have a summer intern named Faye Dingle who is doing some number crunching, and she has been looking at assessors' databases for information and is trying to hone down some of the database data. So I hope you find that helpful. There's a couple of documents in there about nonconformity of lots, numbers of nonconforming lots in the town center. There's some good information in there.
I think our next step is to elect officers.
Yeah.
What officers do we need?
I think traditionally, there's probably a chair and a vice chair.
Okay,
And I don't know if you have a clerk or not. We do have Gail Hunter, who is taking the minutes for this meeting.
so I think we
not
can
quite
probably
sure what
dispense with a clerk.
Yeah.
So let me open nominations for chair.
I nominate Chris Olney as chair.
Are there other nominations? Chris, do you accept the nomination?
Could I nominate you and to be a co-chair?
I would prefer that you make, I would have
appropriate?
nominated Sandy Bodmer Turner.
I can't.
Okay,
I'm happy to help in lots of other ways.
Well, maybe she could be co-chair.
are there other nominations for chair? Okay. All in favor, raise your hand. Nominations for co-chair.
I nominate Denny Hall.
Are there other nominations? Okay. All in favor?
I'd like to nominate Gar, actually. As the Downtown Improvement Committee guy. I mean, this is downtown, it's about downtown, so.
Are you willing to accept the nomination?
Yes, I will be absent the first 2 weeks in August. I just wanted people to know that. I may be able to wire in or Zoom in, but with that condition.
Okay, Denny, did you accept the nomination?
I would second his nomination.
That makes
Thanks
it
a
very
lot.
easy, thank you. Okay, not seeing anyone else jump forward. All in favor of Gar Morse as co-chair, as vice chair? Okay. Now, Chris, would you like to take on the discussion?
He can't, he's remote.
Ah,
Whoever's
okay,
chairing the meeting has to be in the room.
right, okay. Gar, you've just been promoted to chair pro tem. And I'm stepping back and asking you to take on the discussion of meeting schedules and timeframes.
Thank you. Betsy, how many meetings are we going to need over the next 18 months?
I am not clear on that.
Thank you.
So, yeah, clear as mud. So we had set up a schedule initially when this first came about, and we were hoping to have listening sessions and hoping to have public input sessions. We are in the process, I'm working with Tiffany Marletta, we're setting up a website where people are going to be able to submit comments. So that might be helpful to this group. And I know that a number of people kind of take the summer off or, you know, are away for the summer, which is very reasonable. And so what I'm hoping is that we get one of these grants or we get some money from Greg and we move forward on hiring a consultant to do particularly the number crunching part that's needed. And so I would say we need to have at least a meeting a month, if not, you know, maybe every 3 weeks. But also we could, if we did a meeting a month, then we could move into more frequent meetings in the fall, which I think is reasonable.
So would everybody be amenable to saying we're going to have a meeting on the 8th of every month, absent?
It's more convenient for scheduling if we pick a day. And Thursdays are the days that are most convenient because we want to have this room, and generally it's not scheduled on Thursdays.
How about the second Thursday of every month?
That sounds fine.
Let's see,
Anybody averse to that?
no, good suggestion.
Any particular, and I
Is there a
have-
reason why I came up with that? That was simply,
no,
as
no,
this is
I'm
the second Thursday.
I'm actually going to ask you about the time, because I have
Okay.
a slight time constraint. 6:30 is much easier for me than 6:15, but anybody else?
So if we did say 7 o'clock, would that work better for people?
I'm okay with 6:30.
I think
Okay.
6:30, I like to keep things
We
on
get
the
out
early
earlier.
side if possible.
So,
Mike,
Yes, ma'am.
the second Thursday in July is actually bad for me, and I
Okay.
would not be in a position to join remotely.
How about,
Well, further to that, I thought I heard a comment about a summer kind of schedule, so, you know, I'm fine in concept with the second Thursday of every month, subject to not the summer.
I thought we were scheduling something for the summer now, as being once a month in the summer.
I think we want to try to have at least one meeting a month in the summer.
Okay.
Unless that really isn't going to work for people.
Could we move to the next week?
yes,
The 20th?
you want to go to the third Thursday every month? Would that work for people?
That would be great for me, because I have ZBA the third Wednesday, and so that kills a week from me, and gives me other weeks to do fun things.
Okay, the third Thursday of every month, going,
So the next meeting will be July 20th?
yes, yes.
Great.
Fine. Yeah.
At 6:30,
At
At
6:30.
6:30.
great.
I also, let's just set that. If I am going to be the co-chair and moderator or whatever in place, I have a penchant for short meetings. I like meetings that don't last more than an hour, okay? 1 hour. 1 hour. That would be 1 hour.
Don't say it that many times, you're wasting time.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Okay, that is my inclination, and so I would be attempting to achieve that if possible. Are there timeframes, further timeframes that we need to look at? We're obviously going to be flexible and have listening sessions and other activities starting maybe late summer, early fall, that sort of thing too.
Mhm.
So is that, are there any other items to be discussed in agenda number 3? Sandy?
The only thing I would add, Gar, is that I appreciate the efficiency of 1 hour meetings. But I think there is a lot of concern out there on the part of people in the town. And I think listening sessions are one thing, but allowing for time as we go along for people to comment, I think we should be prepared for that and plan to allow for it.
Now, are we gonna put all of the materials regarding this meeting up on the website?
I hope so.
Like we did for the 40B, because
Yeah.
that was very effective.
Yep.
It kept down the public comment some because people were able to see a lot of information
I think
online.
we
The
great.
goal is to get as much accurate information online as we can.
So,
Yeah,
can you work to get this information
I
online?
will,
And as we have meetings, the packet goes online before the meeting
right.
so that people
Right.
can follow.
And are we going to do something to draw people's attention to it?
maybe it can go in the Tide.
Great idea.
And the
Um,
cricket.
And the cricket.
Okay, moving to item number 4. We have had some,
Discussion of staff
Discussion of
support.
that, yes.
Staff support will also include legal counsel from KP Law. And Jonathan Murray is here tonight to talk with us a little bit about the legal ramifications of this particular law.
great,
So, my goal is to get as much information out there to this group as I can. It is going to aim to be extremely factual, and I don't want any hiccups or misunderstandings about things.
great.
So, I think if we're done with that, we can move into
Number 5?
number 5, which is Jonathan.
Evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Murray. I'm from KP Law. I know some of you from other boards in town, but so I'm here to talk about the MBTA zoning law, which is Chapter 40A, the Zoning Act, Section 3A. I thought tonight I might just give you a very brief overview of what the requirements are for the town, and then maybe open up for questions. You'll see if you go through the guidelines that the state has put out, there are a lot of technical requirements, there's a lot of math and calculation, and Betsy knows that the compliance document that they put up on their website, which includes GIS data and Excel spreadsheets, it's very technical, so I don't think that's probably worth all your time at this moment to get into the weeds on how we calculate things, but very broad overview. And then I'll open up to obviously questions. I think that probably is the best use of everyone's time. But for a very broad overview, the state passed through an economic development bill what was called, and what a lot of people will call, is the Housing Choice Act. You'll hear that term a lot. And as part of the Housing Choice Act was this MBTA zoning requirement. It's a new section in the Zoning Act, Chapter 3A. Zoning Act is 40A. It governs ZBA hearings, some planning board hearings. It governs special permits and variances and adoption of zoning. It's the Zoning Act. But what it requires of towns is those towns that the law designates MBTA communities, which you guys are one, has to adopt at least one zoning district of reasonable size in which multifamily housing is permitted as of right. That's the basic requirement. One district, multifamily is allowed as of right, and reasonable size. And reasonable size is defined and different for every town. But in addition to that, it has to have a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre, and it has to be a portion of it, but it has to be within a half a mile of the transit station, and that's your commuter rail station for you all. So I think as you start this planning process, just remember the basic requirement. It's at least one zoning district, multifamily is as of right, and reasonable size. And so I'm sure you all know this, so I don't think I'm speaking down to anyone, but just so we're all on the same page. As of right means doesn't require a special permit, doesn't require a variance, doesn't require any special zoning relief. So I could theoretically walk into the building department, pull a building permit for a multifamily house, there could be some other administrative review that happens, but you don't need to go to the ZBA or the planning board or the select board or whoever else to get a special permit.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
What if it's a 7-story building?
Height requirement? You're talking about
Your
just-
plans that
Yeah.
you're getting approved by the building department is for a 7-story building.
Well, so we're getting into the technical of it. So height would go to minimum gross density. And so the way that the state's gonna calculate that is they're going to take all of the other dimensional requirements, including height, and then it pops out a number at the end to say, do you meet the minimum height requirement? So to say that you have to allow a 7-story building is not necessarily true. You could have a normal height requirement, but that might mean you might need to give some leave for other dimensional requirements to meet that magic minimum gross density number. Does that answer the
I
question?
understand.
Do they have a square footage in mind per residential unit?
That's gonna depend on what you guys come up with. I would say though that the guidelines, when you read through them, you can't adopt dimensional requirements that would hinder the as of right nature. So you can't say, yes, you have a multifamily housing, but they're only 100 square feet. That the state says doesn't meet the goal of the law. But there's no target or required unit
Size.
So today we have 3 units by right in the general district within an existing structure.
So I just wanted, so I would clarify, you're talking about a multifamily use is allowed 3 units as of right.
As of right in the
Yep.
general district, in an existing structure,
Okay.
no new development.
Yep.
And if that were extended to the non-conforming lots in the general district, because today non-conforming lots would require a special permit. If that were extended to the non-conforming lots, would the state look at the size of the existing structures?
So I think something important to keep in mind is when you adopt your zoning district, those lots may not necessarily be non-conforming anymore.
Right.
Because the lot size might be different, the setbacks might be different. So when we think about non-conforming now, part of your task is to determine, do you want them to be conforming or do you want them to be non-conforming? And so that's gonna be part of the equation.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Multifamily.
Yeah.
Is 2-family, 3-family, 4-family,
Three.
is what we decide, is there some?
It's 3 or
Three or
more.
more.
There is another, there's an or clause in the definition. This is on page, let's see here.
In the guidelines?
Yep, it's in the guidelines and it's on page 4. But to answer your question, the simplest way, it's 3 or more units.
Okay.
There is another policy or decision you all can make. It says, or 2 or more buildings on the same lot with more than one residential dwelling unit in each building. So you could craft your district to say, we allow 3 or more, or if you want to have multiple buildings with certain requirements that meets this definition, that's a possibility. But the most straightforward and the most common thing I've seen from other communities that are developing this is 3 or more, because it's a lot more, it's easier to conceptualize.
But we don't have to allow more than 3, we could just say 3.
Well, no, actually, so the multifamily housing means a building with 3 or more, so.
If
It could be
we,
3.
we could say 3 in our zoning, and that's 3 or more. Doesn't say we have to allow for more than 3.
Yeah, and there are in fact, around town, there are certainly properties with, and I don't know whether they're in the zone or not, but there are properties that are, I suppose were once single-family homes. People had little family compounds here, right? And so there are 2 houses on a lot, and they have 2 units in each.
So that would be something
That
that
would qualify.
would qualify. That would be something though, just to bring it back to the overview, is that you would have to allow as of right. So
Right.
when we talk about, we mostly see, or at least I mostly see in my experience, those family compound, those 2 different structures on a lot in the context of ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and a lot of the times those are either a special permit or site plan review or something like that. You just have to keep in mind, if that's a road which is perfectly acceptable road to go down, keep in mind that as of right, there's a limited amount of regulatory review that you would have over that.
Right, although part of the charm of the town is we have 300 years without any zoning.
Fair enough.
So I think we need to take advantage of some of what we learned from that. So anyway, that's one. You said, second question is, you said at least one district.
Yes.
And is there a limit to?
You can have as many districts as you'd like, however, the rule is,
Lot size.
yeah, the districts,
Would that be 5 acres?
yeah, you can't have a district that's less than 5 acres. There's also a requirement that 50% of the district be contiguous, so you can't say, we're gonna do 40
Spot
different
district.
1 acre districts around town. But you can have more than one, but the minimum requirement is that those smaller districts have to be at least 5 acres in size.
Okay, and then you've used the term several times, reasonable size.
Yeah.
Is that reasonable size of the district, of the housing unit? What does it modify?
Yeah, so it's the size of the district.
Size
So
of the district, okay.
one of your requirements, the minimum land area, and do I have the right number here, 39?
37. I think it's supposed to be
I think it is
37.
37,
37.
just was looking.
I'll look at the appendix right now, but it's either 37 or 39 acres. That's your reasonable size there.
So
In-
my
in
understanding,
37 acres in total.
so 37 acres
Oh, 37,
in
yes, I'm sorry.
total. And of that 37 acres, 17 of those acres needs to be within the half-mile radius.
Okay.
And the remaining 20 acres can be outside the
Ah,
radius.
But if we have density greater than 15 per acre, do we need that much acreage? Today, our general district is I think 27 per acre. If you take 6,000 square foot lots and 3 units per lot. Does that impact the total number of acres we have to include?
Oh, no. So it doesn't decrease the amount, but you could, for example, whether it be an overlay or an underlying district, zone districts that are already dense and count those towards the requirements, yes.
Great.
You don't have to take a field, an empty field, and say, put it on.
Okay.
You can zone over or change the underlying zoning, yes.
If you clarify as of right, for example, what other existing or new restrictions could be placed? Could parking still be a requirement, as I think it is now?
So the guidelines say that towns are allowed to adopt a site plan review for as of right, in the context of this multifamily zoning. So it could go to whatever site plan, planning board, zoning board, whoever wants to do site plan review. With that said, and this is just a general comment, is that with any sort of regulatory or administrative review, the state and also the case law says it can't be used as a pretext to deny the use. So certainly you could have a site plan review process with reasonable parking regulations, but that can't be used to say, as a pretext. I'm certainly not suggesting you're saying this, but say you have a 10-unit building and we say you need to have 10 parking spots per unit, so you need to have 100 units. The state and also the Massachusetts courts would say, no, that's a pretext. You're using that to get at the underlying use. So to answer your question, yes, you could have, say, site plan review, but that would still necessitate that the underlying housing use be allowed without any special permission.
So in their analysis of whatever the regulation was, they would, in the compliance review, look at for example, a parking restriction and decide whether or not that impacted the potential use of the land.
Exactly.
But we already have a bylaw with parking, and it's 5 for a 3-family.
I think we require 3 for 2 units, don't we?
Yeah, but we're talking 3 units and we require 5 for 3
Yeah,
units.
right.
So it's going to
So it
really,
wouldn't need a site plan review if that's in the
yes,
bylaw, right?
yeah, certainly. So if you have a parking requirement that's just for all uses, you could apply that. It's hard to give you a definitive because obviously we don't know what the district's going to look like, but that's certainly a possibility.
Confusion for me on this is that when you can look at a regulation that says every lot can have 3 units, but if you look at the parking restriction, it makes it completely impractical on many of those lots.
You're
And I'm sure the
absolutely
compliance
right.
review is going to turn that up right away.
And that's I'm sorry, go ahead. Did you?
No, I was just gonna say, there's a lot of lots in the center of town that would allow that. But then it's a 3,000 square foot lot, so how do you put 5 cars on a 3,000 square foot lot? And then you've got, you know, lot coverage issues if you're in groundwater overlay district. So,
one issue that has been troubling me the most in trying to figure out the best path forward on compliance is our environmental issue, you know, where we sit on the ocean in a floodplain, in the half-mile radius. And I know there is some explanation regarding what's developable, but how does that affect the contiguous requirement? Because there's no way we have that half-mile radius. So if we need another parcel, and it can't be contiguous, I mean, is there a way for us to, leverage is the wrong word, but, you know, there's nothing we can do about our.
Can we get a waiver of that or something?
Yeah, so very clear, there is no waiver procedure in this law at all. There's no way to opt out, there's no way to get any sort of waiver from the guidelines. There's no procedure. With that said, the way that they develop, and this is gonna go to your question as well, the way that they determined what your developable station area is and what your other areas is they took the GIS maps, which are parcel specific, and I don't know the technical how they did it, but what they did is they drew a half-mile radius and they found what was developable land, and they excluded what is defined in the guidelines as excluded land. So that includes rivers and streams and oceans, it includes publicly owned land, and so they picked those parcels out. So to answer your question there's no waiver procedure, but say, and I know Betsy and I have talked about it, say there's a particular parcel that they included in the developable station area, but we know because we've gone to the site and we look at it that it's falling into the ocean. We can go to the state and say, I think you made a mistake, or we have more information that you might want to exclude this. And that might recalculate how much of the area needs to be within half a mile, but I would be very clear, that's an extraordinary relief. It's not something that's commonplace, and it really has to be backed up by some sort of expert, whether it be DPW or Concom or someone else going out there to say, it's
filled tidelands.
yeah, it's excluded, it's you couldn't possibly put a building on this site, it's unsafe, there's gotta be something concrete that we can point to the state to say, you made a mistake in including this.
Did they look at FEMA maps?
My understanding is that they used the GIS map. I don't know if they used a FEMA layer on whatever they did, but.
So to add to that, we, just while we're talking about it, we have preliminary FEMA maps right now, and the permanent ones will come out in December, January of next year. And that's one question I have of the state is, you know, how valid are the FEMA maps that are coming out in relationship to this project?
Okay, good.
But I guess, one thing I'd like us all to think about is this would be an area, to me, that makes sense hiring experts. In the definition of the land that, you know, is reasonably included or not.
So I would say, I think it would be appropriate if there were some, you know, Betsy mentioned that there's filled tidelands and stuff like that. If we go through, or your expert goes through that data and looks at the compliance model and what they went out to the site and said, hey man, state, you included this as part of our developable station area, but we went out to the site and it's not buildable. It's unsafe, it's unstable, it's falling into the ocean. I think that's an appropriate circumstance, but I would like to just temper to say that that's the extraordinary, it's not going to be the ordinary.
It's possible.
Anything's possible.
Well, much of our filled tideland is built. And you're saying it has to be unbuildable rather than unstable in the future.
So this is just my opinion, I've don't have a town yet who's asked the state to do this procedure, although I've had this conversation more than once. If you look in the guidelines, in the definition section, there's a definition of what's called excluded land. And excluded land is land that they didn't include in the minimum land area that's required. And part of the excluded land includes, wetland resource areas, it includes harbors, it includes rivers, streams, ocean, publicly owned land, land that's permanently designated as open space. There's a whole bunch of lists. What I would say is, to the extent that there's a parcel or parcels that are not included in the excluded land, but we're very determined to say there's some other practical reason why multifamily housing can't be built on this particular lot, it would be a reasonable request to the state to say, can you please look at this section again? But I anticipate, and why I said it's extraordinary, the state saying, to your point, well, you have other filled tideland that's built. You have other parcels that you could build multifamily housing on. And so that's why I wanted to just say, I don't want to foreclose the idea altogether, but to your point,
We're currently building on,
Yeah.
and have built on we've filled the tideland so we can build.
Yeah, exactly. So the fact that something is filled tideland doesn't necessarily or not necessarily say it's buildable or unbuildable. That's why I said whether it be Concom or the building inspector or an expert or DPW, whoever's the appropriate person, someone goes out and says, well, this piece of land is good or not good or whatever it may be. And I think that might be something when you're beginning this process and you're saying, well, we want this section of town to be included, or we don't want this section of town to be included. Then when you kind of determine the general area in town, then you get into the lot layer of the map. And we say, okay, this is how we're gonna draw our lines and all that kind of stuff.
Just one comment, and I would be interested in your view about this. As I think you know, the town's gone through a very protracted and miserable back and forth with a developer about a 40B project. And the thing that struck me about this that was so different is that the 40B has been around for a long time, to some degree, as in often in regulatory agencies. The state agency has been a little bit captured by the developers that it's supposed to, in a way, manage and develop. This, on the other hand, is quite different because the regs that I have, I didn't look to see if I had something different than Betsy's, but are October 2022, so they're brand new. So there may be more flexibility and ability to negotiate and find leverage and room as long as we have good reasons and are reasonable about it. If you have can you give me your sense about that?
Sure. So I would just preface by saying, or point out, 40B obviously has an affordability requirement.
Yep.
That's part of Chapter 40B. This does not.
Right. I wasn't concerned about the substance. I was concerned about the notion that over time laws calcify and regulations calcify. This is brand new stuff.
Yeah. So I certainly, I hesitate to opine on the thoughts of Beacon Hill and its members. Certainly you're right, the way that 40B, the statutory scheme is that there is still a permitting process that's involved, and certainly there's a safe harbor and there's procedures for the ZBA to go through. This is a lot more strict. This is towns must do this, and this is how you're going to do it. I'm not skirting the question, I don't know. It's a policy decision of the legislature. They decided that this is how they want to handle local zoning as it pertains to multifamily housing. All I can do is help you guys try to comply with it.
With the reorganization of the state in the housing area, is there any buzz about that impacting this regulation?
No, in fact, they've come out quite firmly since the new governor has come in.
There's a new head of housing.
Yeah, they're particularly
Okay.
confident that this is going to be the same.
So, this is a question I certainly don't expect a detailed answer, but just kind of want to get it out there. I mean, I would like to understand what the implications are if, you know, the regulations don't get put in place, right? Because despite best efforts of this task force and other boards and committees, there's the possibility that it goes before a town vote and doesn't pass. And I think it'd be good to know what those implications are.
Absolutely. So the consequences of not complying is loss of certain state funds. And they're spelled out, but they include things like the one-stop application and the housing choice and MassWorks and
Housing authority.
housing authority money. So the primary penalty is loss of state funding. The town would not be eligible to apply for or receive certain state grants. The other possible consequence of not complying is the current Attorney General has indicated that her office would see non-compliance, intentional non-compliance, as a violation of federal and state housing laws, and that her office would not foreclose the possibility of suing a town who intentionally decides not to comply. We haven't had that come up yet. As far as I'm aware, because I checked before I drove here today, there's 3 towns who haven't filed their action plan. So, and I'm not aware that the AG has taken action against any of those 3 yet. But the main penalty for not complying is loss of state funding and loss of state grants. The secondary thing to be aware of is that the current Attorney General has suggested that she would sue towns to enforce.
You said these 3 towns that have not filed their action plan,
Yep.
are they late? Have they missed?
My understanding is that they've taken the policy decisions not to comply. But
Several of them are fairly small towns that don't apply for grants anyhow.
Have we totaled up the grants we would lose if
We're
we
working
don't?
on that. Basically, all the housing authority funds would disappear.
I've
And
done
then-
my own calcs if you wanna check with me.
Okay, sure.
How much is it?
It's between 200 and 400 a year,
400,000.
200 to 400,000 a year. Out of a budget of 40 million.
Yeah, so
And it includes the dredging funds, which I think, did you include the planned dredging in 2 years? I think it's several million.
Well, obviously, if I'm using 200 to 400, I didn't include several million, right?
Right. Let's get a good number.
Yeah.
Because,
But I'm basing mine on historical, not theoretical stuff in the future.
Well, we're losing theoretical stuff in the future.
Theoretically.
Well, but don't we know what we got from the state with the last dredging, probably?
The last dredging was very small.
Oh, okay.
So let's use that actual.
I'm gonna get your data.
good, thank you.
It seems to me there might be other consequences that have to do with the MBTA in addition. And that might be something to think about. You know, a lot of people rely on the train, and I would hate to see the schedule change or have us be penalized in some way by the MBTA.
The irony there is, we actually are forced to pay money to the MBTA for the right of having stations. So you gotta actually look at both the flows.
Right, but I think we wanna keep it there. I don't think we wanna give it up.
No, fair enough, but I'm just saying, you gotta look at all the flows, right? You gotta look at the net picture, right? Not just the cash in from the state, but the cash out, so.
Just
well, the thing of it is, though, the goal of this MBTA thing, however ham-handed it may be, is the same as the goal in our own master plan, right? I mean, it's the thing that got vetted over a period of many years, my God, and I don't know how many public meetings. So, you know, before we get into saying no money, let's see if there's a way to work with it to our advantage.
Right, but on that point, I'd separate the qualitative and the quantitative, right? So if you're gonna come at it quantitatively and say, if you don't do this, you're not gonna get X dollars, that's one analysis. Then to your point, there's a qualitative one, which says, I don't know, not for money or financial reasons, but we just wanna do this, right? So I'm just saying there's clear distinction in my mind between those two.
Right.
In other words, don't convince me that this needs to be done from a financial perspective if you run the numbers and it's kind of not justified from the numbers point of view. Then you set that aside and then you look at it qualitatively and say, but we want to do it anyways because of.
Yeah, but when you look at the numbers, you have to be sure to look at future possible things per Ann's point about dredging.
Sure,
Well, and
but
do-
that's future and theoretical, so
Does,
you gotta, yeah.
is cell signaling looking for a MassWorks grant?
Yes.
That's what I thought, yeah.
The town applied, I don't know the final figure, but it was between, the last discussion I was involved in was, it was between 5 and 6 million for an infrastructure grant for water and sewer to go under 128 to support that project and other projects.
These are all important issues to consider, but I think at this point, we have very little idea of what the real impact of this law is going to be. It's
Right,
going to sort
that's the
itself
first
out.
job.
We're going to be looking at what the potential for demolition, for reshaping the town and so forth is. And I think we'll be able to have a much more effective discussion about what it's worth and what it's not worth when we know exactly what we're facing.
I just want to close the loop on your question if I can. I just didn't have the bill or the act in front of me. The four funding choices that would be, the town would be ineligible would be the Housing Choice Initiative, the Local Capital Projects Fund, the MassWorks Infrastructure Program, and the HouseWorks MassWorks and HouseWorks. So those are the four: MassWorks, Housing Works, Local Capital Projects, and Housing Choice. So those are the four funds that this law says you would be ineligible for. But
Jonathan, can I ask a different kind of question?
yes,
It's been said that we need to create a density of 15 units per acre, and over 37 acres, that comes out to 550 units roughly of housing that's got to be allowed. My question is, we have about 500 units in the downtown already. Is some of this exercise merely allowing by right what is already existing in the town? Give, for example, 12 Summer Street, which has a density of 29 units an acre. No one seems to complain about what it looks like and how it fits in the town. So what would we need to do to get those 29 or 30 units in 12 Summer Street counted as part of our requirement?
that's a good question. So, and if I didn't say it before, I apologize, but this is not a production goal. The law is very clear. You don't have to produce, and the number is 585 for the town. So you don't have to produce 585 new units. You just have to allow for them under zoning. So part of the calculation, to your question, is you could use lots that already have existing buildings on them, but the zoning that's going to go overlay on there, or the underlying district, whatever you choose, has to allow for this 585, however you calculate it across town. So I think one thing to consider is, yes, you can use existing sites that already have housing or already have something else, but know that in 10, 20, 5 years, whatever it may be, someone might decide, well, I can now build 10 units on this. I'm going to tear down my 3-family and put 10 up. So yeah, you can use, to answer your question, you can use existing sites. There's nothing to say that you have to zone for unimproved property, but just keep in mind what you're doing is you're allowing new uses as of right, which might include tearing down, demolition of existing uses.
But couldn't we, I mean, today those are grandfathered. Couldn't we write it into the bylaw that all existing are by right under the new zoning? And still limit it to existing structures, so people wouldn't be able to tear something down and build a new thing?
That's, you probably know most of all that gets into a tricky area of pre-existing non-conforming, and I don't know if that's where we're going for this, but I think the answer is, you can designate or zone where you know that there's already zoning. You know, certainly if in the general district or the residential or wherever you have multifamily zoning, if that's gonna be your area of town where multifamily goes, that's perfectly fine from policy. We just gotta make sure that it has a minimum of 15 units per acre.
And Jonathan, when you said 585 units,
559.
559?
Mhm.
Okay, well, whatever it is. Do those don't have to be new units?
It's just the capacity. So if, for example, you theoretically tore down everything in your district and you had brand new land with nothing on there, how many units could you legally zone?
Correct.
You need, I think I had old numbers when I wrote this down, but 559.
559. So I guess what I come around to is, how close are we already to being where we need to be?
I think that's a number crunching.
But that's an issue with all of the downtown being non-conforming, so you have to go to the ZBA.
That's the tricky part.
Or you say, you don't have the minimum 6,000 lot size, and you have something in your bylaw saying you can't subdivide existing lots if they're under 6,000.
This is the thing
But-
I don't understand,
Yeah.
maybe you've already answered it, and I just was too thick to get it. But we've got, for example, the Summer Street complex down there, which is high density. Now, is there any, if you zoned the entire general district to allow that density, you'd have
Disaster.
a disaster.
Right.
Is there any way that we could find, and maybe this is to your point, that these existing high-density installations could be incorporated in such a way that we did not extend that same right to all the other properties?
Oh,
Sure.
certainly, yeah. No, the charge of the town and this group is figure out where the map, where on the map you're gonna put it.
I understand, but
Yeah.
but if you gotta get to 559 and you put a zoning overlay on the entire general district, it's not gonna count that Summer Street for the number of units you want unless it.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting it needs to be an overlay over an existing district. You have two general options. You can put an overlay on whatever parcels you'd like. So, forgive me, I don't know the particulars of what you're talking about. But if there's a portion of the street you'd like to be included, you could draw a line and say the east part of the street is included and the west isn't.
But it needs to be 5
5 acres.
acres.
Yes.
So yeah, the minimum has to be five contiguous acres. But you don't have to do an overlay. I make this clear too. You can create or change an underlying zoning district. So you could have whatever you want to call it, high density housing, transit housing, whatever you want to call it. You could have a brand new underlying district and say, you know, here's our new map.
Can I ask the same question, just a little bit different? If I'm understanding it right. It has to be contiguous 5 acres, but the actual shape is at our discretion.
Yeah, the shape, yes, the shape is at your discretion.
Okay.
But you have to remember-
It's gotta be a reasonable size, which I think will, if you were to do one long thin thing.
Right, but it's either 5 acres contiguous, yes or no, right? And so the answer is yes, but it
Yes.
could be the weirdest shape you ever seen, as long as it's 5 acres and it's contiguous.
But it's-
That sounds like,
It's
That's what-
conditioned by reasonable size.
You could
the
even extend
reasonable
it-
size is the 5 acres part. That makes it reasonable size, I think.
Well,
I mean,
I have a question about that. I want to add a little detail to your question, if I may, which is, so within that 5 acres, does the zoning all have to be the same? Or can that district have 2 different sets of requirements?
That would require an overlay. So
Okay, so it could.
theoretically, yes,
Yes.
but to answer your question, so if you decide if you want more than one district, the minimum size of the smaller districts have to be at least 5 acres, so that could be a portion of it, but you should remember too, that of your 37 acres, half of them have to be within the,
Half mile.
I'm sorry,
40%.
you have to have,
40%.
a half,
40%.
but what I'm trying to say is, 50% of the 37 has to be contiguous. So you have to have one big
Okay.
district.
Say that last part again?
So you're required to have 37 total acres,
Mhm.
but 50% of those 37 has to be contiguous.
Oh.
So you have to have at least 19,
18 and a half.
18 and a half. But As to the other 50%, you can say, I'm gonna make my whole district one big thing, or I'm gonna have some smaller districts. But if you choose to do more than one, the minimum size is 5 acres.
So to answer the question, out of the 37, 18 and a half has to be one biggie.
Yep.
And then out of the remainder, you can kind of do whatever you want, subject to the fact that the smallest is 5 acres.
Correct.
Any shape you want,
Contiguous, but yes.
contiguous. Got
Yes.
it.
And the,
And Jonathan, the big, you could do it so that it's double the density in one part of the district and half the 15-unit density in another part of the district. As long as the overall density were 15, you'd be okay. So half of it could be 7 and the other half, I don't know, 25, something like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I'd have to see how that worked out, but as a general matter, I would say it might be okay. I just don't wanna say yes or no to that because I'm concerned about, there's a provision in the guidelines about minimum unit density and differing requirements, and I'd wanna make sure that we draft it in a way that complies with the guidelines. But I'm not saying outright no to that idea.
So Foxborough just did a series of zoning overlays, and they're much larger lots. They're like 18 acres, 24 acres, whatever. But they have, some of them are contiguous and some of them are different requirements per area.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'm certainly don't take my answer to say no outright. It's just, it's not a clear yes or no. It's kind of gonna require on the specifics and complying with the guidelines.
This seems to say that you're allowed to have sub-districts.
Yeah,
And in the sub-districts, you can have different density limits.
yes,
Which might be a way of
yes.
getting around that. Not getting around it, but
Working with,
Fine.
working with what we have.
and
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, it's
Working with
It's
what we
working
have
with
is
what we
this.
have.
17 acres that has to be within the half-mile circle. So we have 20 acres that can be
Someplace.
elsewhere, and we can make the big district outside of the 5
Yes.
half mile.
Yes, you could. What I would just say, and this is not so much a hard and fast rule, but when you read through the guidelines, there are provisions that say that, you know, these locations for housing need to be able to sustain multifamily housing. You know, it needs to be reasonable with people with families and children and that kind of stuff. So not to suggest, I'm certainly not suggesting you were suggesting this, but just I want to caution people to say, when we say, well, we're gonna put the big district outside of the half-mile radius, you can't put it in the middle of the ocean. You know, you can't put it where there are no roads. You can't put it where, you know, roads can't be built. It has to be in an area that could reasonably sustain housing.
Well, we have to use good faith.
Yeah. I just, you know, sometimes it's suggested, well, why don't we put it on this corner of town because nothing will ever be built there. And the state's already clued into that and they're gonna say, well, wait a second, that's not reasonable. That's not an area that could possibly sustain. And again, it's not production, it's just the possibility of, possibility of new units. But yes, your question, you could put the big one outside if the math works out.
Do we have access to the quote-unquote buildable area of our town, whether it's the GIS or the FEMA overlay, whatever, do we have that information at the moment?
so we have the FEMA maps, they're in preliminary form. And those are available in town hall in either the manager's office or the planning board office, which the planning board administrator is in the assessor's office, so she's got a set. You can go online and if you just type in FEMA and then type in the community, we can add some links so people can look at that.
But the DHCDs, or whoever it is who's doing this law, have they given us what they believe is our buildable area in our town at the moment?
is that on the website under the MBTA zoning? I saw something.
So they've determined that it's something like 300 and, what's the,
So the developable station area is 305 acres.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, this is how they came up with the 37 number, your minimum. The way that the guidelines are is you must have either 50 acres or 1.5% of the total developable land in town, whichever's less. You guys have less, it's 37. So, but to say it's not the total area of town, so it's not, not all the square miles or the square acres or whatever the proper term is, it's developable land, so it's privately owned land and public land that's buildable. So it doesn't include things like
conservation?
conservation land or wetlands or bodies of water or anything like that.
Have they given us a snapshot of what that looks like, by any chance?
I'm sure we can ask the 318 from that.
Yeah.
You mean a map, Gar?
I mean,
Yeah,
I'm,
Yeah, a map would
I'm
be
in the
great.
process of working with the assessor's office on getting this group maps.
Okay,
Oh, boy. that was
Great.
So one would be a full town map
Yeah.
and one would be just the half-mile radius.
great. That would
So
be great.
that's in the works.
You can get that from the mapping online already.
Yeah, you can draw a half-mile circle on the GIS map
Yeah.
now, I did it today.
But I just figured people might wanna
Yeah,
have a piece
that
of
would be
paper.
great, yeah.
Yeah,
That would be great.
I'd rather have it online, so I can
Okay,
scale
Play with it.
scale it up and scale it down and.
If you go to the GIS map and go to markup.
I'm just curious about whether that has reasonably current FEMA mapping.
Ah,
I doubt it.
it probably has the old FEMA maps, and I can check with the assessor.
Thank you.
Okay, do we,
I'd prefer a paper hard copy version if it's not
Yeah.
too much trouble.
Me too.
okay,
Gar,
yes,
do we want to take comment from the public at this point? Well, with we have our attorney.
great idea. Are there any comments from the public?
We have Ms. Jakes, who has her hand up.
She's actually an alternate to the committee, so yeah.
Pardon?
She's an alternate to the committee.
Okay. So Becky,
Hi, Becky Jakes, select board alternate, for Ann if need be. When you all were discussing, the, dissemination of information and mentioned Cricket and the town website, Gloucester Daily Times is also, an official paper. So I just want to make sure that one was included.
Great,
okay.
great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments from the public? Hearing none?
I don't see any hands up.
Do you know when our next meeting is? We may be receiving some pretty maps or not, or whatever, and some other stuff. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So before that, I probably will have some kind of location down on the first floor where people can come and pick up stuff.
Great.
And then I can just send out emails to people.
at the
You got it.
possible risk of incurring your wrath over the 1 hour limit, I shall have some
Oh.
questions for our legal.
Oh, I'm sure there'll be
Let-
many questions for.
But right now we have,
So there was somebody, Donna First has a question, are there guidelines enforceable?
So I think I answered that before, but yes, they are enforceable. The main enforcement mechanism is loss of state funding. The secondary means of enforcement is that the state attorney general has indicated that they might file a lawsuit to force a town to comply if they choose not to. So those are the two means as of right now.
Can you address the issue of commercial space on the first floor? We have residences downtown with commercial on the first floor, and how does that impact with the zoning, and how
So
does
the
that get counted?
That's a challenge.
It's a little muddy, but the answer to the question is a zoning scheme that allows or anticipates some sort of mixed use where commercial's on the bottom and housing's on the top, is not necessarily prohibited under this. What I would say is the guidelines say that requiring mixed use is prohibited. You can't say we only allow multifamily housing so long as you have a convenience store on the bottom. You can't do that. If there is some sort of mixed use allowed, the housing component must still be allowed as of right. So you can't say we allow housing in the district, but if you also want to do mixed use, you need a special permit. The state would say no, because then you're requiring something more for the housing component of the structure. So that's why I said it's kind of messy. We'd have to be creative in how we do it. Obviously, if you wanted to allow mixed use as of right, if the sites were appropriate, that's probably the easiest way to go. But at the same time, that comes with a lot of policy decisions on, what kind of uses do we want as of right in particular locations. But it's something that I think it would be a good idea to explore. You can't require mixed use. And if you do allow mixed use, you still have to allow the housing component as of right.
Of 3 units.
Or more. Or more. And I'll just point out that section for you, because I was just looking at it before we started. If I can find it. I'll just note it to you when we walk out, but it's in the guidelines and somewhere here.
I heard, I think it was Mr. Carlucci talk about that from the office, and it seemed like there were some catches to that whole process. And
Yeah.
in particular, I think as you're pointing out, you might wind up being forced to allow your commercial district to go totally residential.
It's a possibility. So the section, it's on page 8 of the guidelines, if you're looking for it, and it's section 4C. And that talks about your question about mixed use and what's permissible and what's not.
Question for you.
Yep.
Am I right in thinking that 40% of the zoning can be outside the station area?
40% needs to be inside the developable station area, 60% can be outside.
Thank you.
And that change, and I'm sure you all know these numbers change based off of what your community is designated as. So if you hear someone from, Newburyport or Rockport or Swamp, they might have different numbers, just so you all are aware, different percentages. It's based off of your size and your designation as a commuter rail community.
And am I correct that the state is not looking at the vulnerability of the train tracks?
Good question.
No. Not that I am aware
The
of.
T's not looking at it either.
Pontoons.
So only if it was washed away would we then not have this
I've
requirement?
asked that question in a couple of meetings. And I've also consulted with a number of my peers along the North Shore corridor. So Beverly, Salem, Swampscott. And there's a number of communities, like if you just think about visually the train corridor from here to Boston, there's a number of areas where it is very low or
Crosses
the
marsh.
train tracks near West Beach. If you look at everybody's vulnerability plan all the way along, Salem and Beverly, there's a number of places it's gonna be underwater before it gets here. So,
Jonathan, would you be guessing that you might be joining us at another meeting at some point?
I think that's probably a question for the town administrator, but I'm more than happy to join, and certainly if you all want to send questions through Betsy, I'm happy to take a look at them, but certainly if you all want to request that, I'm more than happy to take the drive.
certainly as we get closer to drafting something.
Good.
We will be talking with Jonathan.
Now I'm going to say, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Okay. We We don't even have to vote, I don't think.
Yeah, we do.
Oh,
We
you
have to
do.
vote? Okay, all in favor of
Somebody's taking
adjourning?
minutes.
Aye.
Anybody against adjourning? No. Looks like the preponderance of votes are in favor of adjourning. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.